everybody? How is everybody doing tonight? A little warmer tonight, and we're thankful that you are here. I think all of you got a study guide, but if you didn't, we got this as a resource for you, so make sure you have one and you take it with you. Even if you don't fill it out, don't feel like it's a class and you have to fill it out. Nobody's going to be checking on that. Although some of the teachers among us might want to, but nobody, we're not going to give you a grade for it. It's just something for you to keep and kind of like, let me remember what session number 2 was about. You can always go back on Facebook and YouTube and watch it and see, but it's just something else to keep as a resource. And again, we have surveys. Make sure that you turn them in, and that you and we would like to hand out some of these books tomorrow too. Some of you already got them, and that's great. That I'm very, very glad of that. So thank you for being here. I'm going to go ahead and start with a word of prayer again. Tonight we have 2 topics. They're both exciting and difficult at the same time. The second one, I admit, is a little bit more fun because we're going to talk about the oceans, the flood, the layers, and then the second topic is going to be the dinosaurs. And so, except for the names of the dinosaurs, I'm excited about the whole part. But let's pray and ask God to lead us in this conversation. Father, thank you so much for this evening. Thank you for everyone who came out. Lord, it doesn't matter what journey, where we're at in our journey, what we have been exposed to in the past. This is an important conversation to have, and it adds to our growth. So I pray that you help us as we study, help us to put our thinking caps on and to look at the evidence and not be afraid of that conversation. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you to those who are watching as well. Again, you can share it with your friends, or you can watch it later as well. So, origin of the oceans tonight. I'm going to let our friend Dr. Hudson, again, who created the curriculum, kind of introduce that.
Today we're going to take a look at the subject of the origin of the oceans. It's here where creationists feel they have a fairly strong point as they look at the fossil record. To creationists, it seems like there's lots of evidence of a global catastrophe described in Genesis.
And if you notice, the TVs are going to be better for the video
seem to support some aspects of that, whereas
for the text.
Evolutionists say the fossil record seems to support evolution. So let's take a look at those things as we hand things over to our local host again.
Our local host. Thank you, Dr. Hansen. He's always in these really cool places. Yesterday he was with palm trees. Compliments of Northern California. So, the origin of oceans. We have oceans on the world, on this planet. Yesterday we did the origins of the debate, the origins of humanity, and today, the origins of oceans and dinosaurs. We have a lot of water in this planet, and in fact, we know that this is very special. As far as we know so far, it's very special planet specifically, or one of the reasons is because of all that liquid water just being there, and that is one of the most important things for life, as we know it, for this scientific reality that we now experience here and that we see. So, what about these oceans? Where do they come from? And this idea of water and how important it is. Well, to begin this conversation about oceans and water, let's think or remember that for many people, the story of the flood is nothing but a fairy tale. We have pictures like this, and if you saw pictures like this, yes, it's a cute little thing with a rainbow. But actually, that's not very historical. That is not the way that the Bible describes it. It's not the way that the creationist model explains it or believes it. And so what is the evidence? Is there evidence for the flood? What is the evidence as we compare the 2 models? Remember our conversation yesterday of 2 models and how important that is. As you're coming in, make sure you guys have a study guide so you guys follow along with us. Okay, so the Genesis, let's go right to the story of Genesis. The flood, it says the earth was also corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. What was the earth filled with? Violence. So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt. and a little bit of the flesh was corrupted. No, it says all the flesh was corrupted their way on earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. So you see, all the flesh here is described as having been corrupted. According to this model, God created something beautiful, but it was corrupted. And by the time we got to the flood, all flesh, that includes human flesh, but also animal, even the plants, it's just everything. Well, I guess you could say, well, I don't think all flesh describes the plants, but the plants themselves had also changed, definitely, and they had definitely been affected by that corruption, to the point where God saw this and he realized, if I don't step in, we will have no world left. We will have no humanity. We will have no animals left. And what the devil had done was just evil was rampant. And so he saw that intervention was necessary. Now, this is a difficult part, because, and a lot of, you must say, well, evolutionist or somebody who didn't grow up with the little cute, quote unquote, story of the flood, which is not cute at all, but they would say, well, look, this is a God who just likes to just kill people. Like, what sense is there in believing in a God like that? But the reality is that God, and you're going to see this, God is judging the earth, yes. But in judging, he's trying to save it. He's trying to save humanity from destroying itself, to preserve it in the end, to still provide salvation for them. And I want you to think about that as we go through. This is Mount Ararat, where the Bible says the boat ended up in as the waters receded. As far as we can tell from satellite imagery, there is no physical evidence of any big boats there. But this is the area that the ark ended up in. Now, in Kentucky, there is a replica of the ark. Some of you have been there, maybe. Has anybody been there? Maybe some of you have. This is an amazing replica. I'm going to get to go this summer, actually. I'm excited about it. It's a huge boat. It cost, let me see, $100 million to build. That's a little bit of wood, a little bit of lumber. And this was the opening day there. And they have, it's a big tour, and they have some not replicas, but they have some what's it called? Animals, not real animals, but replicas of animals and cages of what it might have been there. But it has 3 levels, like the model of the Bible says it is. And so it's an interesting thing to see, and it's quite impressive. Now, if you look at the stories of the flood, you're going to know, and many of you know this already, that it's not just the Hebrew scriptures that talk about the flood, but a lot of other cultures have it. So one of the first one is the Gilgamesh epic in the 21st century. As far as we can tell, that's when it was written. A guy by the name of, let me see if I find him, Utnapishtim was the guy who survived the flood in this story. And the gods had been mad, and he was the one who survived. And if you think about it, it's not just the Gilgamesh epic. This could be one of the earliest. And a lot of people say, well, see, the Hebrews are just copying. All the cultures are just copying. But really, this is one of the few things that most cultures around the world have in common, this tradition, this oral historical tradition of the flood story. So if you just do a little review, it's quite impressive. You're going to see, for example, so we're talking about obviously the Hebrew, the biblical, but then you have the Sumerian, the Babylonian, the Egyptian, in that part of the world, the Middle East part of the world. You see all these different cultures and ancient scripts that have story of the flood with one person or very few people surviving the flood. If you then, what about, you might say, in Europe? In Europe, you have the same thing. Roman, Greek, Celtic, Scandinavian, German, they all have stories of the flood in their oral traditions, and some even in the written traditions. Then you go to Africa, same thing, Nigerian, Syrian, Tanzanian, Kenya. You see all these different cultures that had the same thing. If you keep moving to Asia, Korean, Hindu, Siberian, Chinese, early Chinese characters. In fact, early Chinese characters are very, very fascinating. If you've never seen this, there's early Chinese characters not only have a story of the flood, but they also have a correlation with like Eden and some of the gospel truths that the Bible teaches. It's very, very interesting if you haven't seen it. But you can see even Russian, Philippine, Indian, they all have stories of the flood. And then in the Pacific side, New Guinean, Australian, Fijian, Samoan, Hawaiian, they have stories also of a catastrophe by water, not by fires or something else. They all have catastrophes of water. And then even in the American continent, you have this oral traditions, even from early times. You're talking about Incas, you're talking about Mayas, you're talking about all these different tribal traditions that had stories of the flood. And so you start looking and say, wait a minute, wow. Did they all like talk to each other? Did they like, why is it so much similarities with these traditions? And so the big similarity is that there was a catastrophe, a very strong catastrophe, and it had to do with water, a lot of water. That's a similarity. Now, the difference with the Hebrew story is that in the Hebrew story, it's not that God just mad and wants to kill humanity and wants to just get rid of humanity. In the Hebrew context, he's actually trying to save humanity because he sees if it doesn't intervene, he's not going to be able to bring salvation through the story of the gospel. And so that is the big difference, so to speak, between all these traditions of the Hebrew. But they all have that watery, so to speak, catastrophe. Interesting thing about water is that even at the beginning of the world, the Bible says in Genesis 1:2 that there was water. It was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So water has always been a part of our planet, even from its inception, and then it played a vital part in the flood. And so you ask yourself, is there a lot of water on this planet? Yes, like I said, it's one of the reasons why this planet is so such a wonderful habitat for life. It is said that if you would flatten out all the earth in a way, basically you would end up with at least 5,000 feet deep oceans all across the world. Like if you took all the mountains, you just flatten everything out, that's a lot of water, if you can imagine that. So yes, there's a lot of water. And then in the story of the flood, it says that it mentions that great fountains of water opened up. So there was water underneath, there might have been water in the atmospheres, there was volcanic activity, the pressure, those geysers. This last summer, I had the privilege of being for the first time at Yellowstone in the Grand Teton area, and let me tell you, it's pretty amazing. We had to wait for a while for Old Faithful, but Old Faithful delivered, and it was just impressive. But all that pressure coming from underneath, that volcanic activity, and very, very plausible, according to the model of creation and the way the Bible tells us, that there was a lot of volcanic activity in the flood and a lot of that pressure and the great fountains and very big catastrophe that affected the world and changed everything. And so for a long time, people understood what they saw based on this idea of catastrophe and water and volcanic activity. The universities of old in Europe, same thing that I was saying yesterday, but the model started changing a little bit, especially when humanism and secular humanism in Europe right now, it's a very, you could say it's a very postmodern secular culture and society, even in universities, right? And so this model that is called Uniformitarianism, those of you who are writing, I'm sure there's a place for you to write that. That is the model that says, it was created by the father of modern geology, Hutton. That is the model that says that things have always been the way that they are today. The same natural processes that are happening today is what created or caused everything that we see around us. That's uniformitarianism. That means it has always been uniform. Okay? So So that's the idea, that you can look and see and say, okay, so we can look at what's happening now and explain everything that we see based on what we see now. And the same rates that are happening now can explain what has happened before. So slow processes replace catastrophes for interpreting the data, interpreting the reality that we saw. And so not a flood, but in reality, small changes of observable processes. So for example, the Grand Canyon, you look at the Grand Canyon, I'm sure many of you have been there. How many of you have been to the Grand Canyon? Okay, so more of you have been to the Grand Canyon than the Ark. That's probably because the Ark is very new, and besides, who wants to miss such a big thing like this, right? And so the Colorado River, it's said you can measure the amount of sediment or rocks or dirt that the Colorado is distributing downstream, and then you can measure the amount of dirt, for lack of a better word, that is missing from the canyon. And then you do the math, and then you figure out, okay, this is how long this river has been carving this giant canyon. So that's how kind of like uniformitarianism works. When you look and you measure and you say, okay, the process that is happening today is happening before. And this became the standard for understanding of all of Earth's natural history. But then you have scientists who say, wait a minute. For example, Brett's looked at a place called Dry Falls. Has anybody been to Dry Falls? We're going to be talking about a lot of different places in Washington, and I don't know. Hopefully you can see the map. But he saw that, and he saw this looks like Niagara Falls. I mean, it looks the same without water. What is going on here? And so he started trying to understand what had happened, and he saw a lot of evidence for a glacial lake that he called Glacial Lake Missoula. And he said during an ice age, sometimes in the past, there was a big glacial lake here, and it created a dam. And then he saw evidence that when that dam was broken, a whole lot of water, he said probably as much as one of the Great Lakes, in 2 or 3 days went through the area. And I think our animation, you can see a little bit kind of how the river here, I don't know if you can see the arrows, but how the river would have gone after the dam broke, and then created this area that is called the Dry Falls. And it took him 40 years to get the geology community to say, hey, we need to pay attention to this. This is quite interesting. Because remember, models are hard to change. And so he would say, guys, current processes cannot explain what I'm seeing here. Come take a look at this. Finally, it did, and now it is accepted. The Lake Missoula is pretty well accepted by all geologists, understanding that something big happened in that place to create the Dry Falls. Brett thought that the Grand Canyon showed similar evidence of catastrophism, right? And now the thing with catastrophe is that you cannot really go into a lab necessarily and see, let me create a catastrophe like this. But once in a while, and some of you will remember this, how many of you remember the Mount St. Helens explosion? Some of you, if it's kind of one of those events that if you remember where you were at and what people were saying and all these things, it was a huge explosion in 1980, May 18, 1980. It was like 50 people died. They lost their lives, but only 7 of those were in a place that was considered unsafe, just because the explosion was so big and unprecedented. It was a big deal. Like every second or every second or something like that, it had the force of a nuclear bomb. Every second at the height of the explosion. So you can wrap your mind around that and how much power that had. And now on the north side of the mountain, there was earthquake, there were big forces, and it exploded. That whole face of the mountain just, and there was a lot of ice melted and snow, so there was water, there was mud, there was volcanic ash, all these kinds of things that happen in this huge explosion, right? Well, what happened after that was very interesting, and it helped to shape the idea of what it takes to create canyons sometimes. In fact, there's something known as the Little Grand Canyon, near the north face of the mountain that was created because of the explosion of the mountain. And it created something that to geologists became really, really interesting. They call it Little Grand Canyon because it seems like a miniature Grand Canyon. And what you see is a lot of similarities with the Grand Canyon. For example, one of the best, not the best, but the most important things is to understand that the layers are completely flat when they touch each other in the Little Grand Canyon. And the same thing with the Grand Canyon, the large Grand Canyon. You see the Grand Canyon, you're going to see that the layers are completely flat. So you see layers over here, layers over there. Those were all laid in a very fast period of time. And in fact, they discovered that these sedimentation, this sedimentary mixture of lava and rock, and because of the water and all these forces, it hardened much quicker than they thought it would. So if you go today, it's a very interesting place to explore. So now you compare that to the Grand Canyon, and you can see that the layers of the Grand Canyon are flat. Now, so the traditional model, the model of evolution, says that these layers represent millions of years old and millions of years in the history, and that they were once the surface of the earth. So that's very important. And now the thing about that is that if you look at the surface of the Grand Canyon, you see that it's not flat. It's just, it's not flat, but all the layers are flat. So how is it that after millions of years of a layer being the surface doesn't look at the same as the surface that is today? That doesn't fit with only uniformitarianism. So it's a little bit of a contradiction, a little bit of a problem. Here's another picture where it shows you the layers just shook very flat, like I don't know, like pancakes or something like that. And so this fits more with catastrophism than, say, with uniformitarianism. And Brett, even though many geologists, he didn't get geologists to be convinced of that as he did with dry falls. Another region of the country, you guys might have been there, these amazing structures. You could see that all of these actually were once like complete like that. And the layers are the same. And you ask yourself, what could have taken all that? That's a lot of mud. That's a lot of dirt missing there. A lot of rock missing. One of the few forces in nature that can do this is water, and we're talking about a lot of very fast water. Another thing that you look at these layers that is interesting is that many times they are kind of like they form these waves or something like this. And now, again, in the uniformitarianism model, each one of these represents long periods of time, and after they harden, then the several forces were lifting them up or bringing them down and things like that. But really, if you think about it, that doesn't look like after it was hardened, that's when the force came. In order for that to happen and those waves to remain like that in sedimentary rock, it has to be soft when the lift is happening, and then you have those waves. So again, that fits more with catastrophism as opposed to uniformitarianism. So, but the question is not whether water was involved. All models understand that water had something to do with it. The question is whether it's a little bit of water for a long time or a lot of water for a relatively very short time. That is the main question of the two models: much water, little water. And again, the models will affect how you interpret the data. You have uniformitarianism, you have catastrophism. Okay, so let's review the three types of rocks. Okay, some of us might not remember this from our classes a long time ago or whenever we took this, but you have sedimentary rock, and you have igneous rock, which is the one that is liquid, fluid, and then it hardened, and then metamorphic, which means that it changed from something to something else. Okay, and so you see some of the examples there on the screen. Most of the layers that we see, 75% of it comes from sedimentary rock. Now, the thing about sedimentary rock is that it's soluble by water. So again, we know that these things, this is very good evidence that in all models that water was involved in the process of forming the layers. And the layers are very, very important in the model of evolution. So let's take a look at the geologic column. This is very, very important. It's a very important understanding this to understand the theory of evolution, the model of evolution, neo-Darwinism and uniformitarianism. So each, you see the millions of years there, and you have three basic eras: Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic. All right, and they each represent many years, millions of years. And the question of, okay, now looking at this, according to the layers, what is the evidence of the layers as to when life came to be? If we're going to take the model of uniformitarianism, we're going to say, okay, when should life appear? Well, we would expect life to show up kind of on the bottom, maybe simple forms, and then start being more complex as we go. But the evidence, interestingly enough, yes, life appears on the bottom, but when life appears on the bottom between the Precambrian and Cambrian phases of the Paleozoic era, most of the life forms that we know today are already present right there. They just show up, boom, according to what we see in those layers. And it's like, wait a minute. 32 out of 35 phyla, which is the basic genres, you could say, of life, all the creatures and life forms that we know on this planet are already present there, boom, from the very beginning. That means that there's already complexity right there, complexity. And not only that, but that all the variety of different life forms is already present right there at the beginning. So that is amazing. I think that's amazing. So much so that they call it the Cambrian Explosion of life, right? Because it is really an explosion of life. And then one of these guys that shows up here is our friend, the Trilobite. These guys, you could say, well, they look kind of simple, but they're not. They're actually very, very complex. One of the complex things about them is that they have eyes. They have full vision. And vision, as you know, is one of the most complex organs to have full vision. So how is it that already at the bottom layer you have complexity, you have variety, and you have these little guys, the trilobites, with full vision already? Check this comment by Ariel Roth. Scientists commonly refer to this abrupt transition, like I told you, like Cambrian explosion. Depending on the classification scheme used, about 30 to 40 or more animal phyla, major categories, appear in this part of the geologic column. So this idea of the Cambrian explosion. And then he says, few or no basic types show up above this level. This sudden appearance challenges any idea of a long, gradual evolutionary process. So this is where creation is, you look at it, the model affects a lot the way you see it. Because when you see that, you start asking a good question. Okay, why are there so many life forms right there at the beginning? That's not what you would expect in uniformitarianism. Even, and remember we quoted Gould yesterday, he is an evolutionist, and he says, the extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as the trade secret of paleontology. What's a trade secret? Something that you want to hide. Okay? The evolutionary trees that adorn our textbook have data only at the tips and nodes of their branches. The rest is inference, not the evidence of the fossils. So he wrote that back in 1977. So he's talking about these trees, the tree of life, no pun intended. That's just the way that we call it, the tree of life. And so he's saying that the tips, we have all these fossils. And again, all of these phyla are represented already on the bottom layer. But then what he's talking about, we have those. What we don't have anything for is you could say the main branch that represents all those ancestors that all of those fossils should have. And even Darwin knew this, but what he said is like, we're going to find those. Eventually, we're going to find those. Now, take a look at this quote that David said, David wrote his conflicts between Darwin and paleontologists, an article back from '79. He says, we are now about 120 years after Darwin, and the knowledge of the fossil record has been greatly expanded. We have more fossils than Darwin had. We now have 250,000 fossil species. Is that a lot of fossils? That's a lot of fossils. But the situation hasn't changed much. We have even fewer examples of evolutionary transition than we had in Darwin's time. So even with more fossils, we have less of those transitional types that you would expect to see in the layers. So why do we even have billions of fossils? He's talking about so many fossils, right? So why do we have so many fossils in the first place? Fish, for example, have one of the best fossils. So you see all these wonderful, amazing details. Where did all these fossils come from, and why are there so many? You have to have very good conditions for fossil making to have this many fossils. And again, this supports catastrophism and very quick speed burial of the animal itself, so that the imprint of the skin, the details of the little scales and all this stuff can be imprinted and fossilized in a beautiful way, a paleontologist would say, right? It's a beautiful fossil. Take a look at this quote, thinking about this idea of fossils and how they came. How do we have so many? All right, by Velikovsky. The explanation of the origin of fossils by the theory of uniformity and evolution contradicts the fundamental principle of these theories. He says, nothing took place in the past that does not take place in the present. That's what uniformitarianism says, right? Today, no fossils are formed. We don't see that happening on the surface or anywhere for that matter, because it requires catastrophism to have that many fossils. Okay. Now, another question that sometimes when we talk about the layers, and I mentioned this when we were talking about the Dreyfus, is the Ice Age. How did it happen? And this is kind of hard to explain. Very few models actually have models that kind of make sense. Although theories abound, no one really knows what causes ice ages. David Alt said, specifically talking about that lake that I was telling you about at the beginning. So in order to have an ice age, you need cold summers, and you need a lot of precipitation. And so how does that happen? Well, one of the things that if you had a lot of is volcanoes. If you had a lot of volcanoes and volcanic activity, you might end up having an ice age. How? Because the volcanoes, as they erupt, they create an ash. So what happens is they warm up the temperature of the water, but they also cover the sun. I don't know if you guys saw recently there was a volcano in Tonga. I have friends from Tonga, and we were praying for their families and this and that. And I remember seeing a video on one of those friends' pages that it was pitch black, like it was midnight, but it was in the middle of the day after the volcano had erupted. It's quite, and because of that, obviously, you block the sun for a long period of time, and you're going to have colder temperature, but the water is warm. And so you create this scenario where you have evaporation and ashes and all this, and create storms, and then that creates in itself, because the land mass becomes affected by while the water is still kind of warm because of the volcano, the land mass is colder because of the temperature of the air dropping, because the sun has been blocked. And then so you have precipitation, and you have what could create an ice age. Now, and again, that model fits better, or I should say, that fits better the model of catastrophism as opposed to uniformitarianism. To have even the ice age, which some people think, ice age, that's like one of the things that people think, okay, evolution. You say evolution, if you say ice age, people think evolution. But in reality, catastrophism, like a worldwide flood, for example, full of volcanic activity, actually is a better model for an ice age than a uniformitarianism even. And then you have the fossil order. What about the fossil order? We have this order of things, and you seem to have what it is, a pattern. Okay, you have bottom dwellers on the bottom layers, even though we already said that 32 out of 35, whatever it was, phyla already represented, but although those are bottom dwellers like the trilobites and those guys. And then you have the fish, and then you have the reptile. It seems like in invertebrates to vertebrates, it seems like you have a pattern of some kind in the fossil order. And so the uniformitarianism says, okay, that model says, okay, you see this pattern? It was created by a long time of little changes and mutations in the genetic code and then natural selection. That's what uniformitarianism says, even though we don't see that kind of mutation actually helping species these days, but that's what the model says. Is there other explanations? Well, yes, there's several other explanations and models why you would have that order. In the first place, if you have a great flood or a worldwide flood or catastrophe like that, you have an amazing opportunity for fossils. Like you have the best of the best, like the mud comes and oxygen is taken out, and then the poor little fish is fossilized almost instantly, you could say. You have that happening. Well, if an animal is caught in that kind of catastrophe, they're gonna appear in the layers that they were living in. So you're gonna have the bottom dwellers on the bottom because that's where they live. So you could say it also can be explained by the habitat where they were at. All right, so the reptiles, the ones that can actually walk and try to escape the rising water might be a little higher. For example, the mammals or those that might end up floating in a catastrophic flood event, they will end up having less fossils because they are not living in the bottom areas or sinking down. So anyway, so that can happen, and also, for example, this is kind of fascinating. It's a little bit nitty-gritty here, but I just wanted to show you this. The Cocokino Sandstone. Leonard Brand looked at these footprints, and by the way, footprints are considered fossils as well. And he saw these are birds. These are. Am I getting confused? No, sorry. These were lizards. Lizards walking. They all seem to be going the same direction. And he saw that when they stepped on it, they had a little mountain. As they left a little mountain as they were walking. And he said, how do you create that little mountain? So he went to his laboratory. He got what animal was it? A salamander. He put salamanders in, and then he got them to walk. I don't know how you get salamanders to walk. Come here, let me give you. I don't know how you encourage a salamander to walk. I'm sure they have their ways. And anyways, he tried to do like wet sand. He tried to do all kinds of different scenarios, right? And he couldn't get it until he put enough water where the salamander was kind of splashing as the salamander went, and then he created the same thing. Now, the thing about these footprints is that they don't have webbed feet, so they are reptiles, but they are not reptiles or lizards that live in the water necessarily. And so what he determined is that these reptiles were walking during some event where water was coming onto their habitats. So interestingly enough, that even some of the footprints show catastrophism, and that might explain also the order that you see on the layers, because if they are trying to escape rising waters, then you might see a certain order like that. So to review, just a little review, because I feel like this is so important. If evolution model was true, okay, let's take that for a second, you would expect a fossil series showing transitions to new species. You will expect simpler life in deeper strata. You would expect fewer species in deeper strata, so both of those, and you would expect macroevolution going on today. You would expect evidence of that. But we don't see any evidence of that in the data. Now, on the other hand, if the model of creation was true, you would expect lack of transitions to new species in fossils. So you would expect kind of like the what we call stasis. In other words, that you see the ancient fossil looks very similar to what the animal we have today. Either they look similar or this animal has become extinct. But we don't have those transitioners. We have a stasis. If a creation model was true, you would expect complex life forms in all of the layers from the beginning to the end, and you would expect more varieties in deeper strata of the layers. And this is exactly what we just saw in these models that I show you, and this thing I'm showing. So let me, I'm not going to show you the whole video here. I'm going to show you just a little bit. I want you to see the beginning of it, as Dr. Hudson has some scientists share with us, because I think it's the beginning part. And we're going to close this section.
There's something about the power and grandeur of these vast oceans on planet Earth. Astronomers tell us that there's no other planet we know of that has oceans like this. So where did all this water come from? We can actually find some answers by studying the rocks, the fossil record. And in the fossil record, we find out that Darwin's theory is not particularly supported with those little tiny changes that he predicted over time. Instead, we either find animals that are very similar to animals today, like the shrimp they find in Germany, or animals that are extinct. We don't have them at all anymore. But let's study again the rocks to see if we can learn more about the history of our oceans.
I like this first interview that he has, his first comments.
Everybody struggles to explain what is going on with the fossil record. There are certain aspects of it that are very well accommodated by the idea of creation followed by a global flood. So, for example, you see these massive deposits of sedimentary rocks across the continents that look like they were put down by water. And obviously, we don't see water all over the continents nowadays. So you could say, well, that's great evidence for the flood. And also, it looks as if fossils are commonly, not 100% of the time, but commonly produced under conditions where there's a lot of water involved. They're rapidly buried in floods or a flood of some kind. And then there's this order in the fossil record. You see different kinds of organisms appearing suddenly in the fossil record. So that's a pattern that is exactly the opposite of what Darwinian evolution would predict. Remember, with Darwinism, we need slow, gradual changes over immense periods of time. That pattern is not reflected in the way the fossils are arranged in the fossil record. But
changed
I'm
everything.
going to skip here to the end, some close-ups just for time's sake. But I like it.
And so if the rocks,
Sandwich
the
column.
fossil record, tells us that at some time in the Earth's past, a worldwide flood destroyed all life on the planet, and if we also believe in a creator God, a God that is a loving creator, why would he send something so severe, something that the Bible calls a strange act? And yet the Bible also says he wanted to save, not destroy. That led to the building of an ark.
So it is hard to reconcile. If you say, well, but if creation was true and the flood is true, then why would God do such a thing, whether he allowed it or brought it? It is hard to reconcile. But remember, if he wanted to just destroy humanity, he would not have come and say, hey, it's going to rain, build a boat, and whoever is in the boat is going to be saved. Clearly, his intention, we have to look at his intention, his heart, was not to destroy, but to save, because he understood that if he didn't intervene, he would not be able to save humanity in the story of the great controversy and the gospel. So I want you to really think about that. Now, a few details about the ark. How big was it? Well, you see how big it was. It was really, really big. How many trains? What is it? 1.5 million cubic feet capacity. That's a lot of capacity. If you measured it in trains, it would be what? How many? 522 train loads would fit in the ark. So it was a big boat, built like an oil tanker so it wouldn't capsize or anything in the deep sea waters. And so you talk about, well, we have a lot of variety. How in the world did all these animals come in? And as you know, you don't need all the dogs that today exist. You don't need the Chihuahuas and the Beagles to be there in the same, like you need a representative with the DNA representative of that to carry that in order for that to work. And then the variety, the power of the DNA is that as there is variety. You can see differences in for example, in the dogs. And humans understood this for a long time. That's why the domesticated animals, we have bred them in certain ways to do what we wanted to do, like the cow or the horse or whatever. And we were looking for certain characteristics, or even the dogs. So you say, well, what was really in the ark? If you look at the word where it says the kinds of animals that was there, it's probably families. If you had 8,000 of the families of animals, that would cover all the animals. You would have 16,000 animals, right? If you had pairs. And granted, some of those animals, there were more than two. If you remember, some of them were 7 animals in the ark of those, and then some were just a pair. But if you did that, you would have still half of the ark left to fill up. And so there is enough room to have representatives so that afterwards, as they populated the earth again, there would be enough. So as we close this section, we're talking about what happened. Some people might say, what happened? Is there evidence of the pre-flood man? According to that model, the humanity at that time was only one civilization, one language, very advanced, very smart. Probably were doing things that we didn't even imagine that they were doing. But what we do know is that all of the efforts and all their intelligence they put in one purpose. And that was for wickedness, for evil, for malice, for violence. That's what the record says. The Lord saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thought of his heart was only evil continually. So very smart and very evil, that's not a good combination. And they lived a long, long time, according to the record too. And so there was a lot of opportunity for a lot of evil to take place. And that's why the Bible says that in his heart, he was grieved. So if you have this civilization, as the waters are rising, just like the other animals, humanity is going to try to escape. There was enough time, because in the record of the Bible, it took a few days, a few weeks, and then a long time for the waters to recede. And so as you see the waters rising, naturally, you're going to try to find higher ground. So most of humanity, all of humanity is going to end up, trying to save themselves, save whatever they can in this big catastrophe, right? And so if you have this kind of catastrophe, and this is really hard to talk about, but the reality is, like I said at the beginning, or I mean earlier, when you have this water, so they would have floated, the mammals and the humans included, would have floated in the water for a long, long time. So it's no wonder why there's more fish fossil than mammals fossils, for example, because of what would have happened in such a big flood catastrophe like that. And it says that the waters prevail exceedingly on the earth, and all the high hills and the whole heaven were covered. That for 150 days, it says. So again, you can imagine what the result of that. While this is happening, underneath there was still volcanic activity, and mud was thrown around, and fossils were still being made, and a lot of things. Another thing to remember is that we don't have enough population now. Even population experts have noticed this, and they have said, "Wait a minute, something must have happened." That means you got to come up with a hypothesis, this population expert says, for an event that wiped out the majority of the variation in humanity, something caused the human population to drop drastically. When and how often that may have happened is anybody's guess. Possible culprits, that he says, include disease, environmental disaster, and conflict. So that's another thing that you have to add to. Something must have happened, even within the evolutionary model and uniformitarianism. They do see that something must have happened to even account for the population of humanity that we have on the earth. And finally, even Mount Everest has sedimentary rock all the way to the top, to the granite. Now, there's granite, yes, metamorphic, yes, and then all the way the sedimentary rock with fossils. So clearly, clearly, as the Bible says, that account says, as the waters were receding, the Bible says that the earth was lifted up. And in another part, and I skipped that verse, but it says, at thy rebuke, the flood waters fled. And at the voice, the thunder, they hasted away. The mountains were rising. And so as they rose and the waters receded, those fossils remained all the way up there in Mount Everest. If you like to go check them out, you might guess, make sure you take a picture of it. And so the Bible takes this very seriously, because it even prophesies that at the end there will be scoffers will come saying, walking according to their own lusts, and then saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. It even prophesies about uniformitarianism. That's right there. People will come in the last days saying, oh, everything is the same. And for this, they willfully forget, this is in Peter, by the way, that by the word of God, the heavens were old. So willfully kind of like thinking, maybe creation. No, I'm going to think of another model. And that the earth standing out of water, and the water by which the world then existed perished, being flooded with water. So these two things, Peter is already prophesying that would happen in our day. And even when you talk about the last message to be given on planet Earth, it talks about judgment. And so if you think about the flood, it's more evidence of judgment than it is evidence of creation in a way. And yet, when we say the word judgment, we always think, well, God is mad at us, be careful. But in reality, God is trying to save. God's judgment is to save humanity. What he's trying to do is get rid of pain, get rid of evil, get rid of innocent kids suffering, and get rid of even nature suffering. So he steps in. So many times we say to God, God, why don't you do something about all this evil? Well, he does. But when he does, then we say, well, why did you do that? Because when God intervenes and steps in to defend and to finally put an end to evil, then we feel like, well, he is now taking our privacy away. So this is why the flood is kind of tricky, because now we have to, not only we have to see that the evidence points us to a higher being, but now we see that the evidence is that maybe he wants to save us, he loves us, and he's trying to bring judgment to protect me from evil, and finally put an end to evil. And so as you look at your model today, and as you look at how you think about this, and you try to grasp and think about these hard subjects, and I think the flood is a hard subject. It's one of the saddest parts of the Hebrew record. What kind of model do you have? And is there room for that loving God who's trying to save you and say, hey, I'm telling you ahead of time because I don't want you to suffer this. I am giving you I'm telling you yes, but I'm also providing so that you don't have to suffer, because what I'm trying to do is get rid of pain and finally give you life the way that I intended it to be. Is there room in your model for that kind of God? Let's take a break here. You go to the bathrooms. I have put, and stand up, I have put some posters. Now, these posters to my left were here from last night. I have put some questions to the right. So even if you don't have to go to the bathroom, I want you to stand up and go to those questions and just think. And if you want to discuss, go ahead and discuss. If you didn't grab a study guide, take this time to study. Guys, so I'll give you 3.5 minutes. Here we go. All right. Now, the origin of dinosaurs. We talked about the layers, and I might skip a few of the early discoveries and all of that to get to some of the things that I think are more valuable. But very quickly, the word dinosaur is not very old per se. It's a pretty relative new term. But there were these ideas of big old reptiles, and the dinosaurs are, as we're going to see, a kind of reptile. But this idea, and for a long time, any big animal like that we called a dragon. And dragon, even in the Bible, but the word dragon comes from the Greek drakon, and it means large reptile. Now, in the medieval ages, they kind of like mixed it with all this spiritualism type of things, but really the word just means large reptile. And just keep that in mind, because the dinosaur, as we're going to see, it was coined later on as we started finding this fossil within our modern, kind of like our modern era. The first one to find something that we probably would say is a dinosaur in 1676. Plot thought it must have been an elephant that the Romans brought during Roman era. It was a good guess, but not right. Now we know it was a dinosaur. So sometimes scientists do get it wrong, of course, because they taking a guess, making assumptions. And then in the United States, there was a preacher that found thousands of footprints, Pastor Hitchcock in Connecticut. And he thought that they were made by giant birds. But in reality, they are dinosaur fossils. Sometimes preachers also can get it wrong. And sometimes we might say something that later on we find out, oh, it wasn't completely accurate. And then in England, they started finding these tooths. You have this Mantell's tooth, and he didn't know what it was. He started, what is this? Is this from this? Is this from that? And finally, a friend told him, that looks like an iguana tooth, just 20 times bigger. and so they call this the Iguanodon. How do you like that? Which means iguana tooth. And this is kind of the early depiction of it now, because we have found a lot more Iguanodon bones. We kind of think that it probably might have looked kind of like this. Then there were also this jaw that was found, and they thought it's a big lizard. They call it the Megalosaurus, which just simply means big lizard. And this is the rendition of that was. You can see the jaw there sticking out. And then the father of, we could say, one of the next to Darwin, who was probably the one of the other scientists who was really famous in the 19th century, Richard Owen. In fact, sometimes they disagreed about some things with Darwin. But he was an anatomist, and he was really into bone structure and all of this. And so he is the one that coined the term Dinosaurs when all these bones started popping up. And I put a picture of a lizard because really what it means is awesome lizards. So anytime you say the word awesome, now you can say dino. That was dino. So you can practice that, okay? So you remember what it means. And saurus means lizard. So he was the one that coined that term based on these bones that were showing up. And then one of they started making displays of what they thought it looked like. They're still there in London at the Crystal Ice Palace. Those were really famous at the time in 1850s. And then in Philadelphia, I'm just going really fast through some of those early findings of bones. Dr. Lady in Philadelphia found, it was this 1860, and he called it Hadrosaur, or some people say Hadrosaur. I was researching, all the people say Hadrosaur. So, take your pick, I guess. This is 1860. You can see pictures or drawings, or really, really early pictures of him with his finding. Now, this is how big the hadrosaur that he had found, and it was the first here in the USA discovered that, and this was a sensation at the time because it was one of those things that everybody wanted to see, and everybody was kind of like into. In fact, it's kind of sparked what I call a Dino Rush. You heard of the Gold Rush. Well, this was a Dino Rush. Everybody was out to find these bones, and museums especially, they wanted a piece of it, of course, and it was very very famous. People would go to Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota, Colorado, parts of Arizona and Utah to find these bones and put them in display. And they were finding a lot more iguanodons in Europe, and like, for example, this large, Brachiosaurus, ended up being in Paris, but it was found in the USA. So many museums were trying to display these things. It was very, very important for them. It became a sensation. This is the American Museum of Natural History in New York. They found this amazing skeleton. They call it Brontosaurus. And remember, saurus means what? Lizard. So this lizard, and you can see how they're putting it together there and stuff. And however, later on they found that the skull was from a different skeleton, but it didn't matter. People were like, "This is amazing," and they were. These bones are like quite amazing. And now sometimes we feel a little nervous about these bones. What about this bone? But the reality is that they are there, and there's lots and lots and lots of them. They also had a painting in the American Natural Museum because the artist was trying to imagine what it might have been in the world, and found these early paintings, sparked the imagination of people. But so far, all up to that point, they were big, they were small, but they were mostly until they found these big teeth and said, "Whoa, what is this?" Something with very serious teeth. Osborne, his name was, this was 1905 in Wyoming. He found something that was different than others, and he called it Tyrannosaurus Rex, which means tyrant. Right? You see the tyrant. Rex means king in Latin, so tyrant, king, lizard, or king, tyrant, lizard. So it's a tyrant king of the lizards, right? So they have fun with this name. I think that's kind of cool. So this T-Rex, and he was, wow, these T-Rex. They started finding more of these T-Rexes. They realized that they were carnivores, and in fact they sometimes found them with pieces of others. For example, this Triceratops, there were pieces of Triceratops inside the tummies of the T-Rexes. So they thought, okay, but are they scavengers? Are they hunters? What are they? They're trying to figure that out. And it seems like sometimes they found, for example, this particular one, that they seem to have been fighting because the T-Rex had some ribs broken and these things, and they think that they were actually escaping something, and they were fighting, and then they ended up being fossilized together in the middle of that fight as the T-Rex were trying, possibly even escaping rising waters. Not sure, but the cool thing about it is that, wow, this amazing big old thing. The footprints of the T-Rex are something really big as well, 9 inches deep, so they could see that they were heavy animals. This one right here was discovered in 1983. And for example, up to from the ones I'm kind of showing, going quickly through the history of what they found, this T-Rex famous was only 40% complete up to a certain point. Then they found one that was 90% complete. And they call it Sue, not because, in fact, we don't know the genders of the dinosaurs, but the person that discovers it gets to name it or gets the name from it. And so Sue found this beautiful skeleton of the T-Rex in 1990, and with 90% of it. Did you know that it only takes 10% or so of the bones to be found to be considered a skeleton? Already. So even if it has only 10, 20%, it's already counted as a skeleton. This Sue was sold for $8 million to the museum in Chicago. And that's where it's displayed right now, very proudly. If some of you might have been there, big museum there in Chicago. And the interesting thing is that they also started to look inside the bones of the T-Rexes. Now, this is fascinating. Some of you know exactly what I'm going to say. They started looking at inside the bones. And what were we going to find inside the bones? And you know what they found? They found soft tissue inside the T-Rex bone. They found vessels that they were still soft enough to move. Like I guess you would say maybe like rubbery or something like that. And it's supposed to have been there for millions of years. How does soft tissue stay like that for millions of years? So it's not really compatible with that model. It's more compatible with, first of all, catastrophism and more of a modern catastrophe. And they also found, so that's a picture of the vessels. They also found blood stains inside this bone that, again, this is a great, and it was a great find. People are still researching that and talking about it. It's supposed to be 65 million years old, but how could that be? So you can see that it doesn't follow that model very well. It's also, you find lots of footprints. By the way, I remember working at a summer camp called, what was it called? Nameless Valley Ranch in Texas, in the heart of Texas. The Texas Conference doesn't have that ranch anymore. They sold it off. And it's kind of sad because in that ranch, you actually had footprints. And I'm not sure which dinosaur it was, but I remember seeing those footprints. And then you have other evidence like the skin But people say, well, how do we know that dinosaurs were reptiles? Well, one of the things is the skin. We have this amazing fossilized things that you, just like the fish I showed you at the beginning, that you see all these details of some of the skins and the scales of the reptiles. And you also find eggs. And so reptiles, we know that reptiles also lay eggs. And now these eggs are about what, ostrich size or maybe a little bigger depending, but they're all about the same size. Even like the T-Rex might be a little bit, what they say, it's a little bit narrower, while the other ones are a little bit wider or whatever. And very, very rarely you find them with actual bones inside. You would think that by the size of the animal, it could be much bigger, but no, it's about, you see the inches, like I was telling you, something like this. But they did find, I'm seeing, they did find one with a bone, with bones inside, or fragmentary bones inside, which was it's very, very rare to find eggs like that. Even today, you can find new dinosaurs. Yes, there's still a lot of fossils left. In fact, if you go to Wyoming, there is a dig every summer that Southwestern Adventist University does. That's my alma mater. And and you can actually go, you can volunteer and dig with them. And I really want to show you the video for this one because it's really, really cool. And anyways, you're gonna get to hear more about it. But they still digging many of these bones. And like I said, the video is gonna highlight some of these. And they finding mainly Edmontosaurus, which are a form of Hadrosaurs. And for example, these are, you can see a rib there, and the one on the left, it was, they kind of took him a while to recognize what it was. And as they draw him out, they put a little, I guess you could call it kind of like glue. They say it's kind of like something that makes the bone a little bit harder to take it back. But before they pulled it out, they map it out with GPS technology so that they can make a map of what it looked like under the ground. And it's really fascinating once they map it out and they see that you can see that this is not really a skeleton here. This is all fragmentary portions of bones and things that you can see that this is good evidence, again, that these were put here by water sediments in a big catastrophe very quickly, all there. And so that fits the model of, for example, a worldwide flood, better than millions of years in the layers. What did they look like? Well, sometimes you can find a skull like this. Skull? Am I pronouncing that right? This is Ankylosaurus. And so you can see, okay, so it kind of looked like that. It takes a little bit of imagination, but you can see the resemblance. Okay, that was quite the skull there. So how did the dinosaurs go to birds? According to the model of evolution, from dinosaurs, they evolved to birds. And so there's two theories. It's a little bit hard to explain, but either the ones that have two legs, like the T-Rex or something like that, either those evolved to birds, or the small crocodile that were in trees, as they jumped from place to place, they developed some kind of wings. But both of these models have a lot of issues, a lot of problems, a lot of contradictions. You need a lot of things to happen for a bird to have evolved from such a thing as this little cute guy that you see here on the screen. First of all, small forearms. You have heavy tails. And then you cold-blooded reptile, you have to have a warm-blooded animal. So there is a lot of things. The bumpy scales have to become feathers. And if you know, like the scales is on the outside, whereas the feathers, the follicles, are inside, underneath the skin. So that's a genetic change. That's how does that happen? As we talked about yesterday, those mutations, genetically speaking, the molecular biologists are saying it happened somehow, but we don't know how, because this is very complex change here that it could happen like this. And so, when were the dinosaurs alive? Well, according to the Geologic Column, you see that they start showing up in the Jurassic era, in the Jurassic time. Sorry, these are the birds. I'm showing you the birds first. This is when the feathered birds start showing up in the Jurassic, right? So you see that, and they said, okay, well, there's time for the dinosaur to have evolved into that. If you put the dinosaurs side by side to that, the flying dinosaurs, you can see we start seeing them a little bit lower in the layers. But the model of evolution does not believe or teach that the feathered animals came from the flying dinosaurs, interestingly enough, but actually from the land dinosaurs, which is a little confusing. But so not from the flying, from the land. So you can see the land ones started a little bit earlier. The problem is that then they found footprints that clearly were made by feathered animals way before. So almost at basically the same time as land dinosaurs are shown. And so that is, again, that doesn't really fit that model of uniformitarianism and evolutionary process of small changes. And these are the footprints that they found. You can see the what do they call it? The helix, the backward toe. That is evidence of a feathered animal. And so they said, oh, wait, how can that be? These footprints are significant with morphology identical to modern birds. Remember the stasis that I was talking about? The fossil, similar to what we see today. So how can that be? That was a little bit confusing. By the way, these footprints, guess where they're at? You guessed it, one of the best places in the world to find fossils, in Argentina. Yes, let's go. I had to say that. So that's where these footprints are, and this is an Argentinian Ricardo Melchor, we would say. Anyways, Argentinian scientists, they're saying this is difficult. Now, let's take a look. This is a fascinating slide here. This is just incredible. So these are on the right, you have all the fossils we have of dinosaurs, and we have a lot of fossils, like a lot of fossils. Unlike, remember we were talking about yesterday about the origins of humanity and those fossils, transitionary fossils, there's not very many. But here, there's a lot, and we're still finding tons more, which is, again, it aligns better with the model of catastrophism. Anyways, so you see all of the different kinds of dinosaurs and how many we have found so far. And then on the left is the ancestor to the dinosaurs, right? At some point in the past. Well, guess how many, and you can see the lines that are drawn in between. Guess how many we have found from the ancestors to the actual fossils that we have now. And you guessed it. None. Zero. And this, again, is a problem. So, and it is a problem that is well known. David Wishampole says, from my reading of the fossil record of dinosaur, no direct ancestor have been discovered for any dinosaur species. Alas, he says, my list of dinosaurian ancestors is an empty one. It's a big problem. So you can see how, again, you're looking at the models and you're seeing, okay, what is the evidence here and what is happening? And then the other thing is that, just wanted to point out that not all dinosaurs are big. In fact, what makes a dinosaur is not really the size, even though their name means awesome lizard. Yes, some of them were really big. Some of the biggest land animals that have roamed on the planet were the dinosaurs, 130 feet long. Do you realize how long that is? That's a really long animal. But some of them were small, like chickens. Now, unfortunately for these guys, people don't know these names very well. People know the names of the big guys. But the little ones, the little dinosaurs, we don't want to. We should study the little ones too. So what makes a dinosaur? It's in the hips. This is kind of important just science for us to understand the difference between other kind of reptiles and a dinosaur. It's in the hips. The hips of a lizard, of a modern lizard, you could say, puts the body closer to the ground. It comes out straight out like this. Whereas the dinosaurs, the type of hip puts the body further from the ground, so the dinosaur has a little more lift, so to speak. And so that does create a difference. Now, I want to show you this video And then we'll close the subject of the dinosaurs. Okay, but this is a really cool video, and they're gonna show you in Wyoming, the dig in Wyoming, and what they think. And these are all, by the way, these are all creationist professors doing these digs. So I think it's fascinating what they have found.
In the mid-1800s, when dinosaur bones were being found all around the world, they did much to strengthen Charles Darwin's questioning of the biblical account of creation. There's no question that these bones reveal an ancient world much different than the world in which we're living now. Let's go and take a look at where those dinosaur bones are being found. Let's go to a dig site in the state of Wyoming.
I got a call from a friend of mine, and he told me about this place in Wyoming where there were a lot of dinosaur bones and that they wanted a creationist to work on it. So I wasn't really initially interested, so I called a colleague of mine who's a vertebrate paleontologist, and he came out and looked at it. Subsequently, he brought me out here, and we looked at it together, and the owner of the ranch, who's a very wonderful person, brought me up onto one of these ridges. It's actually very near to here. And he opened up the door of his truck and got out, and he said, okay, hop out. And I looked down at the ground. It was covered with dinosaur bones. I couldn't walk on the ground. I had to step nimbly to keep from stepping on them. But that convinced me that I needed to spend time on this because these bones are being washed away and they're lost to science.
So somewhere, sometime, dinosaurs were here. And what we see behind us, this whole area, these are the main quarries here. There's some outlying quarries. But the main quarries are approximately 1 meter thick and cover quite an area. So the little bits you see here that's already been taken out, a couple other quarries are about 1.5% of what we think the whole bone bed is. We have quite a range of dinosaurs. The main ones are hadrosaurs. They are the duck-billed dinosaurs, 35 feet long, 6 tons, 5 to 6 tons, big ones.
These dinosaurs show a lot of decay took place before they were buried, ultimately buried. They may have been buried and then re-emerged. But the most sensible scenario I can think of is that these dinosaurs were killed probably by drowning or some other cataclysm. And they floated and bloated so that the carcasses were floating on water. They were probably driven onto a shoreline by wind where they rotted for a period of time. And during this time they were rotting, the carnivorous dinosaurs were still around, and they came over and began to eat on these carcasses because we find the shed teeth of carnivorous dinosaurs, of the theropods. We find those in amongst the bones. Ultimately, the bones were remobilized and transported out into deeper water, and we know that because they occur in a graded bed. So the big bones are at the bottom and the little bones are at the top.
Our project has advanced our view on origins because of the techniques we use. The high precision GPS data allows us to map our bone beds. And by doing so, we've been able to figure out what event led to all these dinosaurs being deposited at this site. Our system is so advanced that the greater scientific community has noticed what we're doing, and we've been able to publish our data. I think this is amazing because not only are we seeing that our deposit was put there by a flood-like event, now that other scientists are examining their bone beds and looking for alternative scenarios, they're also seeing evidence of catastrophic flood events. And even though we can't say this is a global type flood event just yet, we do see more and more evidence for catastrophic flood events resulting in large bone beds.
One of the questions a lot of young people have is where did the dinosaurs come from? Did God make them, or are they some anomaly of nature that is freaky and difficult to explain? I think most kids love dinosaurs, and I think it's it's very clear God made dinosaurs. They were alive, they were amazing creatures, and there are whole ecosystems that comprised of dinosaurs.
Will there be dinosaurs in heaven? I sure hope so. I love to be a good Christian, to try my best, but I get a little extra motivation from thinking that I get to play with a T-Rex or play fetch with some raptors in heaven. I personally think they're remarkable animals, and I can't wait to see them in person. At least I hope. I can't prove it, but I really do hope we get to see them again.
I would love to see some, like feathered dinosaurs like the, Deinonychus and the raptors and things like that, and see really how bird-like were they. I think that some of those dinosaurs probably were part of God's creation. And so I hope. I don't know, but I hope.
I'm a biologist. I want to study these things. And I will tell you that when I look at dinosaurs, they're not the dreadful things that are frequently depicted in the movies. Yes, there are obviously some that were predators of various kinds, some of them terrifyingly big like T-Rex, or just terrifyingly big like the titanosaurs and things. But most dinosaurs were normal-sized creatures. Many of them were obviously herbivores, so they ate plants. I'd like to see one of those in action. They look like they were amazingly designed creatures, and I have lots of questions about them. I want to know how those absolutely huge dinosaurs, how they got blood up to their brains. We talk about how small their brains were, and I have lots of questions about that. But how did they pump all that blood way up there? These things are more than twice as tall, or at least twice as tall, as giraffes are today. We know that giraffes have very specialized systems to allow them to be that tall. I want to know what was going on with those dinosaurs that allowed them to be massive in the way that a few of them were.
I think heaven's going to be a lot different from what we expect and what we have on this world. I don't know if there's any reason to have dinosaurs in heaven. I don't even know if we'll have horses in heaven. I don't know what's going to be there. But I'll leave that with the Lord. He can decide that, and I'll be happy with his answer.
I feel very strongly that dinosaurs will be in heaven. I think they're amazing creatures. And if it is a dinosaur Job is talking about in Job 40 as behemoth, then he says it's the first of the creation of God. So it's something really special to him.
I don't want to see a dinosaur when I first get to heaven, because I'm still only 5'8". But we have the impression that we will grow up, and just to see these enormous organisms, I would feel like an ant, and maybe be squished. But certainly that possibility exists.
You know what I think? I think when we get to heaven, or perhaps more appropriately the new earth, we'll get a number of surprises. We'll be surprised by some of the people who are there. We might be surprised by some of the people who are not there. We might even be surprised by some of the animals that we see, maybe animals that we've never seen before. Now, if God created dinosaurs to begin with, then they were wiped out by some means or another. No doubt they'll be there. But I'm willing to leave this one to God. If they're there, I'll be thrilled. That'll add some interest. If they're not, probably won't miss them too much.
This is a replica skull of an Edmontosaurus, the kind of dinosaur that they are finding the remains of thousands of there in the Wyoming dig site we just saw. Dinosaurs are a very popular subject today in the world, especially among kids. For many, they prove the idea that the world is millions of years old. But let's start thinking of them in a different way. Let's start thinking of them as a class of animals that God created that he might be actually rather proud of. Let's take a look at that now.
So interesting, right? Let's wrap this up a little bit. Does the Bible say anything about dinosaurs? What does the Bible say on the model of it? Well, the Genesis account says that God created the sea creatures. The word is taninim, which generally in other places in the Old Testament it's used for reptiles or long things. So it could be that it was referring to some large reptiles. It could be. And remember, dinosaurs are part of reptiles. The hip is a little bit different, but they are a form of reptile, you could say. In Job is a very interesting book. It's the first book of the Bible that was written. Moses was probably the one who wrote it. And he mentions this behemoth. Now, behemoth simply means beast, so we don't know what that animal was. But he says a few things about the behemoth that are very interesting. He says he eats grass like an ox. Okay, so he's vegetarian. He says his strength is in his hips. That's interesting. His power is in his stomach muscles. All right. He moves his tail like a cedar. Cedar was the biggest tree known to mankind there. And Job was someone probably who lived not too much after the flood, after the Tower of Babel. So very likely, if this model is correct, and God created some of the dinosaurs, maybe some of the dinosaurs they were so smart, they could have bred the dinosaurs to do things, whatever they wanted to do with them. Just like we have bred horses and elephants to do whatever. Maybe the pre-flood civilizations could have used dinosaurs for war and who knows what. But the fact is that if there were some of these that had been created by God, and then they would have survived the flood, but the flood changed everything. The rotation of the earth changed, the atmosphere changed, the salinity of the water in the oceans changed. So not every creature adapted the same way and was able to survive as much or as long as the other creatures. But by the time that Job was alive, this behemoth was still alive, and God is telling Job, he's talking to Job, and he's explaining this thing, and he says his tail is big like a cedar, his bones are like beams of bronze, and his ribs like bars of iron. So God sounds pretty proud of this behemoth. And then he says he is the first of the ways of God. Isn't that interesting? So many scholars think that this could probably be a hippo. A hippo has strong muscles in the tummy. They have big or strong bones, right? They eat grass, but the problem is the tail. The tail doesn't really fit, does it? The tail of a hippo is not really like a cedar. Cedar, again, it was this massive. Think like the ponderosa pines, or think like really big trees. That's what it was. So what is God talking about? Well, some scientists, some creationists say, wait a minute, this really sounds like a different kind of grass, eater that Job would have been really impressed with. And it could be that this kinds of grass eaters. So could it be that God was talking about some kind of dinosaur-like, reptile-like being with a huge tail, the way that we find in the bones? It is a possibility. Do we know for sure? It's hard to tell. But it could come in. Then he talks about the Leviathan. Now, Leviathan is a completely different creature. But the Leviathan, he talks about big limbs. He says he has a coat of armor. He says that big, fearsome teeth. He talks about it almost like a huge crocodile. And we know that the way that God describes him, he has strength in the neck. He leaves a trail in the mud like a threshing sledge. So whoever Leviathan was walking on mud. And then in the deep, it says that he churns like a boiling cauldron and stirs up the sea like a pot of ointment. What is this creature? Is this creature alive today? I don't think so. Now, he even says that he has eyes like flames stream out of his mouth and shoot out. We know animals that shoot out stuff. Sometimes they shoot saliva, venom, they shoot all kinds of. We know animals that can have combustion in their organism. How cool would it be? I always think the lightning bugs are some of the coolest organisms on earth, because I would love to be able to light up my tummy whenever I want to. I just think that's kind of cool that they're doing this chemistry and fire inside of them. So could it be? Yes, God could have this creature that is able to do these chemical and amazing things, but were they related to dinosaurs? Maybe. The fact is, what we do know is that God cursed all the animals, and that the way he created them, how proud he was of them, they became less. Especially when you're talking about the serpent. And this is very interesting because the serpent is also called the dragon. Remember what the word dragon meant? What did it mean? Have you fallen asleep already? Come on, we're almost out. What did the word dragon mean in Greek? You don't remember, do you? Reptile, yeah, correct. So the interesting thing is this relationship between the dinosaurs, the reptiles, the curse, as you see the animals changing from creation, the flood, and all the things that happen after creation, and then all the changes that happen after the flood. The animals had to adapt a lot after the fall, and then they had to adapt a lot after the flood. Not all the animals survived. Clearly, Job knew some animals that we don't know. And to go back to what God had said, the earth was corrupt before God. The earth was filled with violence, and so it even affected the animals, the dinosaurs, the humanity. Everything was filled with violence. And some of the dinosaurs, and you know this, some of the dinosaurs look like they're ready for war, or that they will somehow bred or prepared for attack, spikes out of their tails and things like this. You know, not all of them were like that, but some of them were. They were affected by this. And so, finally, just to close up, one of the areas where creationists and evolutionists agree is that probably catastrophism killed off the dinosaurs. And that is what the flood was. Volcanic activity, great water depositions, and even maybe meteorite activity even during the flood. We see evidence of meteorite activity on Earth, and even the layer on top of the last layer of where the dinosaurs are found has iridium, which iridium is extremely rare, really, really rare, much more rare than gold, but it's found more often in meteorites than it's found on Earth. So it is interesting that that's the last layer where you find dinosaur fossils. Could it be that during the flood there were some meteorites, including that volcanic activity? Yes, there could have been. And you know, could there have been some dinosaurs, some juvenile dinosaurs, some of those? How did those huge ones? Well, if you had juvenile dinosaurs in the ark, they would have fit some of the big ones. And remember, not all dinosaurs were that big either. And reptiles grow according to their habitat and so forth. If you allow them, the reptiles will grow bigger than other animals, depending on resources and things like that. And even if you look at cultures, they have a lot of stories about hunting these dragons, these reptile-like creatures, and they're proud of it. Well, if humanity went after whatever was left after the flood of the dinosaurs, no wonder we are very good at bringing extinction on the species on our planet. We're the best species at it, to bring extinction on another species. And so if we were after these guys or whatever, for whatever reason, it could be the dragon, because remember, the word dragon just simply means reptile. But listen to the promise as the Bible gives us a picture of the new earth. The wolf and the lamb shall feed together, the lion shall eat straw like an ox, the nursing child shall play with the cover's hole, and the weaned child shall put his hand in the viper's den. So reptiles I mentioned, they shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain. And yet we know, to go back to the very verse that we started with, that it is prophesied that the great dragon, as he was cast out, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. So it's interesting that this idea of deception in the Bible is connected to the word reptile or dragon. So as we look, and tomorrow we have two more, by the way, tomorrow we have two more presentations. We're going to finish with the origins of Earth, where we're going to deal with the difficult subject of dating, and then the origins of the universe, kind of like existential and questions and the Big Bang. But as we wrestle with this, and as we think about our models and the different models, and how much space is in my heart for different models, for how am I seeing the data that I'm seeing? How am I going to interpret that data? According to the text in the Bible, we know that especially before the end time, especially before Jesus comes back, this idea of deception is going to be very, very strong. And it is not a coincidence, I don't think, that this deception and the dragon is connected in the book of Revelation. So let's not be afraid. As a creationist, sometimes I've been nervous about, let's talk about dinosaurs. I'm a little nervous about these guys because people think, oh, millions of years old. But actually, just like the other presentations that we saw, when you really look at the evidence, it actually makes a lot more sense, or they give evidence to catastrophism, to creation and flood, just like the other parts that we have seen. So, dinosaurs tonight. How about it? What do you say if we close with the prayer again, as I address the personal God that I believe to be with us right now? Father, I thank you so much for creating so much variety. And Father, we are trying to cover so much ground and so much information. But whatever needed to stick in our brain, help it to be interesting, help it to be to spark some thinking, that our models will be expanded the way that we think. And Father, help us to trust you, to understand that your judgment is not to hurt us. You're actually trying to protect us. And in the end, you're going to put an end to evil. You're going to put an end to the curse. And even the animals that we fear are going to be right there with us in the new earth and with kids. And it's going to be a blast. And we're going to see creation the way you intended it to be. Help us to be there. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much for sticking by. Oh, I kept you a little longer. I'm sorry. It's because it takes so long to talk about dinosaurs. Anyways, thank you so much. Make sure you take your study guide. Bring it tomorrow again to complete the last two at 6:30 tomorrow again. Bring friends. We will see you next time. Again, there's books. Dr. James, if you want, if Out of Thin Air, please take that copy. It's for every single body. Out of Thin Air, a book about this subject as well. May you have a great evening. We will see you tomorrow.